everyone. Welcome to today's episode on Materiality Matters. We would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I am Simoni Rathod from Lodha & Company ESG Practice. Lodha & Company is an 80-year-old assurance and advisory firm with 6 offices all over the country. In this webinar, we will be understanding the concept of materiality for ESG integration and reporting. The purpose of the webinar is purely educational. Any kind of compliance-related decisions shall be referred to the professional advisor. Participants are requested to stay on mute at all times during the sessions. Participants can post their queries, questions, raise hands, or unmute themselves at the end of the session. Participants can also write to us at esg@lodaco.com. Participants can also watch our previous episodes on YouTube, the link of which is available on the chat box. As the India INC is now gearing towards ESG integration and sustainability reporting, the concept of materiality has gained a lot of significance. Materiality is now a major sustainability trend. It is about being more concise and tighten focus on what is important to the business and to the stakeholders. By taking into account different stakeholder perspectives, companies can limit their reporting to those criteria and help the readers understand what could positively and negatively influence the organization's capacity. So, material issues. What are material issues? These are the issues that have direct or indirect impact on an organization's ability to create, preserve, or deplete economic, environmental, and social value for itself, its stakeholders, and the societies. These material issues influence the business in diverse ways in the short, medium, and long term. Therefore, a thorough examination of these issues are very crucial to ensure business sustainability. In the year 2013, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development analyzed 175 sustainability reports of their member companies, and it was found that less than 12% companies made their sustainability reports where less than 12, where very less material issues were reported. So in order to work on how to in order to have a proper concept, in order to improve the sustainability performance management and sustainability reporting, it is important to work and understand how to apply the concept of materiality. The purpose. Why is materiality so important? Once the company identifies the important material ESG issues, the company can align their sustainability strategy with their corporate strategy. Secondly, the company can identify and prioritize their business opportunities. Thirdly, the company can improve their decision-making processes by incorporating key sustainability criteria. And fourth is on finding the important risk and opportunities, the company can better report on their sustainability reports. Now, I would like to pass on the virtual flow to Mr. Manishankar Prasad. Mr. Manishankar Prasad has 14 years of experience in environmental and social consulting from various countries in Asia and Africa. Currently, he is the Vice President of ESG Practice, Lodha & Company.
Hello, morning, evening, and afternoon from whichever part of the world that our participants are joining us from. Many thanks, Simoni, for the wonderful introduction and for the kind words. And it was a really dynamic start to the presentation. Right now, I delve into 2 very important concepts regarding materiality, which are double materiality, which is often stated in the Global Reporting Initiative vocabulary, and in terms of SASB and other reporting frameworks as well. So double materiality is actually when we consider environmental and social risks as far as the operational aspects of the organization are concerned. So where does this term materiality come from? The term materiality basically comes from the accounting jargon, the financial jargon in which the company's activities might influence stakeholder decisions about the company and might erode or in fact create business value over time. So so this entire notion of double materiality is in sync to something from the triple bottom line concept, which is people, planet, and profit. So when we do normal accounting of organizations and business processes, we only factor in the financial aspects of the organization, right? So in double materiality, we try consider what is material from the environmental and social perspective as well, because environmental and social factors, variables are important to factor into the operations in terms of how it depletes long-term value, right? Because we are essentially talking about risk over here. And when we talk about risk, we also have to account for environmental and social externalities. Environmental and social externalities are basically pollution concerns. Even biodiversity right now is considered a asset risk to many investors, right? So we need to really factor into environmental and social concerns in terms of business operations and business processes. And materiality is often the bridge between the conceptual part of environmental and social justice to the realm of business and stakeholder capitalism. In fact, this is the conceptual bridge between the very vague to the material. And in fact, there's a project at the Harvard Business School called the Impact Accounting Initiative, led by George Serafim, who came up with this beautiful book, Purpose Plus Profit, a few months back, which talks about how environmental and social issues are in fact material. And how do we in fact think about the term material? Material is in fact what is important for a business operations, right? It is important for your business continuity of your operations. So we can think about so in fact we can think about materiality in terms of how does it impact the business model, and how does the company's operations impact other shareholders or stakeholders, and in fact impact enterprise value. Uh, Moving on from double materiality, which is in fact significant from the standpoint of GRI reporting and impact reporting and impact investing, as a matter of fact, we can in fact move on to dynamic materiality, right? For example, when we talk about risk is not a static variable, right? It moves, evolves, mutates uh, according to the context, time, and space in which these various factors intermingle, right? As dependencies, codependencies, interdependencies, right? So one can be a independent variable at one point of time. At a different point of time, it can be a dependent variable, right? When we talk about carbon, for example, carbon can consider an independent variable in terms of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 reporting, but biodiversity can be considered a dependent variable, right? For example, when we talk about forestry companies, when we talk about paper and pulp companies, when we talk about organizations which are dependent upon agricultural and forestry materials, these are all issues which are intermingled and intertwined. So dynamic materiality is in fact the financial materiality of, of the ESG impact over time, right? So it is dependent upon a multitude of factors, as risk is dynamic in nature itself. So dynamic materiality builds upon double materiality, but it also makes it evident that as a dynamic entity, right, it has to be ESG is something and materiality is something which organizations have to consider at all times of the business operations, in the proactive and in the future forward aspect as well, in the orientation which looks towards the future. So as we move on to the next slide, we in fact think about how to conduct a materiality assessment in the first place. How do we start? So the starting point of materiality is to think about ESG as not a peripheral concept to your business. That is the foregrounding concept, which we have to consider, right? Ultimately, sustainability is a frame of mind, and ESG is a instrument or a framework in which sustainability is made real in terms of business processes. Ultimately, sustainability is towards moving businesses towards operating in a fair, ethical, and climate compliant manner. So how do we conduct a materiality assessment? We conduct a materiality assessment by identifying the key issues relevant to a business, uh, in terms of these can be culled or drawn from or borrowed from SSB, which has industry relevant issues already mapped out in terms of sustainability frameworks. Uh, a good way is to look at your peer group, right? So if you're a cement company, look at your peers, both locally and globally and regionally as well. Look at your competitors or the people who are there with you in the same ecosystem, right? Read their sustainability reports. Look at the issues, what they are facing. It's a good starting point to have. Another starting point is, of course, as I mentioned, is GRI, which talks about a lot about double materiality. That's where double material originally came from in the first case, but also look at SASB, which is a part of IFRS right now. But SASB has done deep research into sector-wise issue mapping for materiality. So stakeholder groups can be identified based on the relevance of the material issues. And also, not every stakeholder group will be relevant towards the materiality process as well. Some groups might be influenced by the outcome of the materiality, or might be even an input variable in identifying the issues of materiality in itself. So the company has to identify its business drivers, and in identifying issues such as consumer satisfaction, its role on revenue, and also employee retention. The human capital dimension is often overlooked in these conversations, but the people dimension is equally important as the climate dimension, for example. So after you identify issues from the relevant stakeholder groups, what do? After you identify your business drivers, you then set out to collect data from your internal and external stakeholders, right? You sit down with them, you speak to them, you engage in focus group discussions, in workshops, you discuss these issues, and you rank these issues and according to your priority, right? So it's very important to map these issues in a thorough, comprehensive manner, and to cluster these issues as per their real sense of business continuity, and which group is relevant to what issue is very, very important, because ESG is ultimately about business. Uh, it's not a compliance issue, but it's a hard business issue in terms of day-to-day operations and organizational culture. So, so after you do the process of prioritizing, right? What do you do next? Because it is a business issue, you have to align these materiality issues with your strategy development and with your key management personnel in the organization, right? So once the final matrix is determined, it can be presented to key executives within the organization for review, right? Because ultimately these key individuals are also your stakeholders, which you ultimately mapped out initially. So the final iteration to the matrix can be made, and then the company can integrate these issues, the matrix, into the mainstream strategy development process. Not to say that materiality is not a strategy itself, and these different material issues can then be delegated to different executive teams for execution's sake. and also to develop the right set of metrics, sensible metrics, usually mapped to global reporting indices such as GRI, again, or TCFD, in order to ensure that it's not just a theory building exercise, but something is done on the ground on a monthly or a quarterly or even an annual review basis. So in general, the materiality matrix is revisited every couple of years, depending upon business processes. So uh, as we mentioned, what you measure is what you manage, and ultimately, annual sustainability reports contain the materiality matrix often. Uh, Often the materiality matrix is part of an integrated report of banks, of other FMCG companies as well, and BFCs, which we have seen. They publish the materiality matrix way up ahead in the report as a kind of foregrounding their ESG agenda. So GRI is often the benchmarking protocol against which the reporting is done for sustainability. There also can be various iterations which borrow from various other frameworks as well. So so that's a process of materiality that we just delve into at this point of time. We all have to consider what are these roadblocks towards doing a sensible materiality assessment. Of course, there are various reporting frameworks such as GRI, SSB, and also the Integrated Reporting Council that define materiality from perspectives. So these various definitions, in fact, create a lot of confusion upon which standard protocol definition to follow. Despite all these definitions, the outcome is usually the same, right? You need to identify what is important to you and how to go about implementing them in a sensible way so that you can evaluate your performance over the long term. In fact, materiality is at the very cornerstone of the ESG agenda. So there is a process to it. Of course, the process can vary as per geography, sector, the size of the organization, because it is often no one size fits all agenda. In fact, there are various interpretations of the process itself, which is not really uh, a very bad thing in my opinion. However, for the in the view of standardization, it might be problematic. In fact, ESG is often berated for its multiplicity of perspectives. But as the world is diverse and plural, approaches to ESG, which is akin to quality of living almost, is also open to various different perspectives. Uh, Another very common challenge for sustainability organizations within companies is how do you draw the reporting boundary for materiality? So do you include joint ventures? Do you include the entire value chain? Or do you just limit it to your legally registered entity? So the next step is that how do you have to communicate your materiality assessment, right? You do it as a part of a sustainability report often, but many organizations don't publish such a report in an external facing manner. It is often for an internal audience. So sustainability reporting is often seen from an external perspective, right? So it's outside your core business almost. So it's often the responsibility of the sustainability team of an organization or the ESG team of an organization rather than the strategy or the operations of an organization. But as we can see, ESG is mainstream business, and that's often a limiting factor when the sustainability teams have to engage um, the materiality assessment process, which is an organization as a whole process, not really only a sustainability team mandate or an agenda. So many of these organizations are global organizations that we talk about, and so different group companies, different offices, different factory assets are all dispersed all over the world, even though they are within the same organization in a listed sense of the term. It can quite be a challenge of what is material to each asset within the organization, from Indonesia to Indiana probably, and and the global scale often stretches or limits the boundaries of what can be considered material and in a simpler way. But complexity is often uh, the very nature of business. So materiality has to grapple with the notion of complexity, and 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 with terms such as dynamic materiality, it's indeed very well juxtaposed against the reality that global businesses are complex businesses, and dynamic materiality is well suited for that. So we move on to a bunch of case studies at the moment in order to, in fact, think through how a ESG materiality map might look like, as a matter of fact. And if we take an organization from the FMCG space, what are the key ESG focus areas over here? So if you take an ESG materiality of FMCG organization, if you think about improving health and well-being, which is often at the very core of FMCG, then the material topics can be distributed into sustainable sourcing, right? So a lot of raw materials need to be a part of your inputs as a part of your manufacturing. Climate change is one, because the value chains are very dispersed and scope 3 emissions are very material in that sense. Another very important material issue is waste and packaging material, and how do you reduce and recycle and become a part of the circular ecosystem, and as a part of reducing your environmental impact, and we consider improving health and well-being issues. uh, Many of the products in FMCG, if I'm allowed to recall, concentrate on hygiene issues, sanitation, nutrition. These are fundamental issues, right? Because these contribute towards quality of life directly. And when we think about a materiality map in the first case, we have to consider which material issues need to be focused iteratively or continuously, or they are just issues which are sufficient enough on the level of a discussion. So, so of course, another very important material issue is how do you enhance livelihoods as a part of the FMCG space. So a very important material issue often is how do you include minorities as a part of your value chain? How do you provide them employment? So DEI becomes an issue. There are also issues of business and human rights over there, especially in terms of very diverse global value chains in palm oil or rubber. So there are issues like water as well, which is very important from a material standpoint. So there are also other wider sustainability topics such as compliance, governance, and ethics. There are other issues, but primarily speaking, FMCG companies are big into water and waste, and also about how they improve access or inclusivity towards health and hygiene and nutrition. So these are the important material issues as far as the FMCG sector is concerned. Now we move on to the next sector that we are talking over here, which is of the metals and mining sector, which is very crucial when we think of a transition, right? When we think of the net zero transition, critical metals are at the heart of EVs, at the heart of solar panels, right? And as a part of, you need vanadium, you need titanium, you need these rare metals in the periodic table, right? If you have a look at the periodic table, all these rare metals are at the very core of the net zero transition. And where do these mines metals come from? Rather, they come from conflict areas, they come from fragile states, which often has clouded the entire net zero clean energy transition dialogue. So how do you do a materiality assessment process of a metals and mining company? You basically do a wide-ranging stakeholder mapping in terms of global megatrends, local regulations, and also what the leadership of the company wants. And then you provide these inputs to the senior management of the company that get translated into the strategic lens, the programs and processes and plans which are made for the organization. And of course, lastly, you need to disclose the performance of your materiality mapping vis-a-vis international benchmarks and indicators. So the most crucial issues, material topics as far as environment is, of course, waste. A lot of mining tailing waste is a crucial material issue. You have seen from the Vale incident in Brazil that mining waste is a significant transnational tort issue as well, which leads to litigation internationally. Of course, there are air emissions. There are also a lot of local water resource issues as well, which come up from an environmental standpoint. There are significant community management issues, occupational health and safety issues as well. A lot of problems regarding ethical behavior of mining companies as well. Are these blood diamonds, are these blood metals which are being supplied in global supply chains? So supply chain accountability is a major issue from the government side. There are significant upsides to a mining company as well, because these companies offer a lot of crucial infrastructure in areas of the world where there is no power, no water, no educational resources. So they create an entire ecosystem around the mine, and that's the strength of a mining and metal company. Not everything is bad on mining and metals, as we can see from the media. A lot of tax is being paid by these mining and metal companies as well. A lot of community development takes place, and of course, as I mentioned, it is crucial for any economic development of a country to invest in this indigenous metals and mining sector, particularly in the view of the green and clean transition, which depends upon these metals in the first case. So, so when we look at these focus issues, there are plenty of them, and mining and metal companies are usually extremely proactive about managing their material issues, because it directly links to their reputational capital, and many of these companies are in fact listed on the London Metals Exchange and other publicly listed bourses. So moving from mining and metals to the pharmaceutical sector, the process, in fact, of the materiality mapping is very similar, right? You identify the internal and external stakeholders, you engage in stakeholder dialogue, and then you create an indices, you integrate it into management plans, and ultimately you create a reporting infrastructure. So the beauty of the pharmaceutical sector is that it is a hugely regulated sector. So there is a compliance culture over there already present. There are audits being held um, by the local regulator, by the EU, by the US FDA on a regular basis on the pharmaceutical sector. So they are used to a lot of audits, and they have very strong occupational health and safety and compliance teams in the pharmaceutical space. In fact, the best integrated reports often come from the pharmaceutical sector itself. Uh, However, there are a number of material issues over there. Risk is a major issue. ESG compliance is a major issue, and overall, uh, there is a lot of focus on regulatory compliance. On the environmental end of the spectrum, waste management, hazardous waste management is significant. They use a lot of energy and water, which needs to be tracked and mapped, and the best available technology or BAT needs to be applied in order to create cost savings and also from a climate lens. And uh, the pharmaceutical sector employs a lot of people, a lot of well-educated scientists, technicians are being hired by them. So it is a matter of great employment generation as well. A lot of these pharmaceutical organizations do excellent CSR and community development work. Uh, the upside of the materiality process for the pharmaceutical sector is social inclusion. They have tremendous impact on global communities, which often is not raised enough, I guess. They create health access, they create health equity, which is very, very important, which needs to be mapped apart from the economic end of the spectrum, which is a direct case for impact reporting. So it's very, very important. And R&D is very, very important in the pharmaceutical sector, because that's the crucial edge which differentiates one pharma company vis-a-vis the others. A lot of scope for innovation is around. A lot of scope for health and safety is also around in the pharmaceutical space. And as I mentioned, in the highly regulated space, usually compliance is very, very high, and also they are extremely vigilant too. So last but not the least, moving to the materiality process for the financial sector. Why is it important? Because a lot of catalytic capital for climate adaptation and mitigation comes from the financial sector. A lot of focus on materiality and ESG on the financial space is happening because of the transition risk, right? And there are three kinds of transition risks, which I would like to mention. First of all, is the physical risk. You invest money in an asset which is prone to flash flooding, and there is direct devaluation risk over there. Secondly is you have transition risk. For example, an asset which is a power asset which you are invested in is at the direct risk of not being sustainable over the long term, because it's a thermal power asset. As the world is moving towards hydrogen and other renewable sources, it is the transition risk. A third most important risk, which often is not talked about in ESG conversations, I guess, is liability risk. A lot of investors are being taken to court for not having a climate risk or a mitigation risk plan in place, because a lot of investors are asking that if you invest our money, what will the climate risk on this investment be? So portfolio risk and climate risk are merging in the era of the TCFD, right? Where you have to do climate modeling, you have to do climate scenario analysis. There is already extensive guidance from the SEC, from the Bank of England, and from the Australian regulators regarding assessment of climate scenario risk. So as far as the materiality is concerned, banks are usually very, very engaged with their stakeholders. They need to map their material risk as per ESG, and they need to bring all the stakeholders to the table and map them and rank them, and of course create initiatives in which they will be able to map their climate risk in terms of both their portfolio as well as their investment risk as well. So they need to create, they often create materiality maps. They often were very, very proactive in these matters because, again, like pharma, the financial sector is heavily regulated, and there is always a big brother looking after them or looking over their shoulders. So, so in terms of the most critical ESG risks, of course, these are direct governance risks, which are of course money laundering, which are business practices which are not very ethical in nature. There's also data security issues in the era of retail digital banking. Among the very critical issues in social, of course, can be: are you investing in projects which are leading to some kind of social risk among your communities? Are you assessing for human rights due diligences in your value chain, in your assets as well? Because modern slavery risk is another risk, along with climate risk, which is indeed very material for the financial sector. Among the environmental issues, transition risk is a significant risk for them, as mentioned. And of course, as a heavily regulated sector, the aspect of the ESG is very, very strong as far as the materiality is concerned. So at this juncture, I would like to focus my attention on what are the best or next practices for materiality assessment. Materiality assessments have often been the starting point to assess non-financial risk or opportunities as well. Usually these are done by a third-party auditor, consultant, sparring partner, whichever nomenclature we want to use, because a third-party perspective is often very important as a form of convening power, right? Because a lot of materiality discussions are about bringing all the disparate stakeholders in your material ecosystem on the same table. So a third party facilitator is often needed to convene and cut through the hierarchies of the various organizations, which are immensely complex at times. So, so it is also important to speak to stakeholders which are not really important to your immediate range of view or site of view. So, so companies can talk to pressure groups, for example. Like, for example, a lot of the pressure groups are in the civil society space, like BankWatch, right? For the financial sector, are in fact tracking how many of these banks are investing in coal assets and in traditional power assets, right? And a lot of attention is coming across the media in the Guardian and other spaces that these pressure groups, these regulators, these watchdogs are creating. So do not miss these pressure groups in your materiality assessments. So so there are three scales of doing materiality assessment. Basically, what is the perceived materiality to the organization? What is the possible risk to the company, to your stakeholders, and the overall society as a whole? And also try to do an assessment of the probability of occurrence, whether it is short term, medium term, or long term. And of course, develop a cohesive, comprehensive materiality matrix which captures all the triggers, all the green shoots, and the red flags in the most clear manner, so that these can be integrated in a very operational sense of the term in developing the right policies, procedures, strategies, which speak to your everyday nature of your business rather than as a side issue. So materiality is interconnected with your business, and that has to be really spelled out at this point of time. It's actually best practice or next practice to have your materiality assessments validated by an assurance partner uh, or an auditor, so that you can receive even more robust feedback on your processes. So at this point of time, thank you very much for your attention, and we would be running a small poll at this juncture, which in fact Simone will be right now launching. So please take a few seconds of your time in order to populate this materiality mapping snap poll on your screens, and we would love to hear from you. So a few seconds more. At this point of time, I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and uh, pass on the virtual floor back to Simone for facilitating the next phase of the webinar and presentation, which will be a dialogue with the participants over here. Thank you so much.
Attendees can now post their queries, questions in the chat box. They can also unmute themselves or even raise their hands.
We would love to hear from the participants in terms of thoughts, in terms of ideas, or any probes which we can engage in a viable conversation at this point of time. Okay, I can see a probe from Vrushti, which says that if an entity has not carried out materiality assessment before, what is the first step to be taken to carry out the assessment? Thank you so much, Vrushti, for your question. This is a very important question. How do we, in fact, begin the conversation, right? How do we start off with the dialogue? How to start off with the dialogue would be to, in fact, think about what are your key drivers for your business in terms of environmental, social, and governance risk. Map these down, talk with your teams. Most importantly, engage a facilitator, engage a third-party expert in terms of how they would like to convene your organizational stakeholders before, because most of these organizations are huge, massive, have a global scale. So the conversation, the sparring sessions for materiality assessment take a lot of time. And in fact, the difficulty, the complexity in the process is often to bring these stakeholders in the same room or in the virtual room in the times of Zoom as we are in. So first step, start thinking about what your drivers are. Engage your top management. Don't let it be a sustainability department exercise, and then try and engage experts who do know their job in terms of facilitation techniques, which is often as important as your technical competence. So I hope it answered Vrishti's question. I look forward to some more thoughts from the audience. Does any other uh, participant have any other probe that we can discuss? At this point of time, I would like to bring about a thought in which each materiality is about context, and every context will have its own flavor and its own little nuance to it. But the strength of materiality is that it does offer you insights into how to improve your core business processes, and it should be thought about as a core business process and not a ESG disclosure exercise. Are there any further probes, Simone, from your end? Okay, I can see Arthur, Mark, and Akshata both popping in their probes in the chat box. I will take Mark's probe first at this point of time. Going off track in the materiality assessment is due to lack of knowledge or just intentional. Okay, there is no standard process or protocol to materiality assessments, Arthur, if I'm allowed to call you so. And of course, experienced facilitator or a sustainability team manager or member would be able to rightly be able to steer the discussion in the right direction. So a lot of it depends upon competence as well. I don't think so anybody would like to do such a comprehensive exercise just to go astray intentionally. I hope that answered your probe, Arthur. And I can see Akshata Shinde's probe over here as well. For a certain organization, how is the categorization of ESG focus areas carried out? Okay, ESG focus areas are basically what is the most critical to your business continuity, right? For example, if I talk about the metals and mining sector, if you don't manage community sentiment and community management well, it might result in operations being impacted because there will be people protesting outside your facility, and there will be social unrest as well. The second point is a lot of companies are being taken to court. So in terms of having a proxy for what is important for you is also having to have a look at what your litigation risks are in the era of climate litigation as well. So I think so that is a very nice backhanded way to have a look at what your focus areas are. I hope that answered both Akshata as well as Arthur's questions. And many thanks for your probes at this point of time. As we are closing in on the hour, I would like to hand over the virtual floor back to Simone for her concluding remarks. And thank you very much.
So, Ms. Anuradha Menon had raised her hands.
Yes, if Anuradha can unmute and ask a probe.
A very good afternoon, sir. Thank you for this insightful presentation. So I have a question here. With the World Economic Forum's latest global risk report, which cites that mental health is one of the emerging threats of our world, how relevant do you think is human capital management to ESG, considering the S factor of ESG?
Absolutely. Mental health is a very significant material issue to to organizations which are heavily dependent upon human creativity for their business operations, such as technology, such as professional services, or any kind of service industry. As a matter of fact, there is a well-cited trend of people who are silently moving on from their jobs because they are no longer they can't deal with the rigors of corporate life, and mental health is almost like a mini crisis in many a sector, due to which we can see a lot of reporting on that, and there have been multiple studies which have shown that mental health and human capital productivity are directly related to each other. I think so. It's a very material issue and should be considered within the ESG materiality frameworks acutely, if I'm allowed to intervene over here. And many thanks. I hope I answered it adequately, Anuradha.
Yes, sir. I have one more question too. Is it recommended to conduct materiality assessment through a third party?
Yes and no. There are many companies who do materiality assessments only for the internal audiences, and they have a well-staffed and experienced sustainability teams. But of course, that is again a function of the scale and size of the organization. Smaller organizations who don't have the bandwidth for extensive sustainability teams often go on for third-party help, which is very common, because a lot of companies uh, are in fact outsourcing their entire ESG departments out to professional services firms or other experts because of the emerging ESG climate risk which is around their businesses, and they can't find the right set of talent. So of course, take all the help you can, which is the thought process I have. Thank you so much, Anuradha.
Thank you, sir.
So for the final remarks, it's back to Samoni. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and giving us your valuable time today. We hope this session was informative. We request your feedback, as your feedback is important to us to ensure that the sessions meet your needs. We look forward to your participation in all our upcoming webinars. Thank you.